Welcome to Agency Acquisitions and Exits. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today's guest is Tom Byrne. Tom's one of those agency operators who's seen M&A and agency life from every angle. He's a founder, operator, buyer, seller. He's been through multiple exits, starting with his own company in his 20s, and then helped Periscopics grow to a 150 plus person agency before selling to Merkle. He was able to add value and contribute his capabilities to help these organizations break through the glass ceiling of growth and then eventually join the bigger networks. From there, he lived through the Merkle to Dentsu integration and had a front row seat to what happens when culture and strategy don't exactly align. And then he later stepped in as CEO of RocketMill, taking it from an employee-owned structure through a sale to PMG. Along the way, he's been involved in multiple acquisitions and has the right approach when thinking about how to create value from the teams of people who are servicing these clients. So this is going to be a deep one. Not just on how deals get done, but what actually makes them successful after they close. Let's dive in. Tom, thank you for joining me. So we have so much to unpack in such a small bit of time. So let's set the stage by kind of giving the intro, the background that's necessary for someone to understand you if they don't know who you are already. And then we'll kind of go through this extensive and exhaustive list of experiences, and then I will drill you, Tom, when appropriate.
Yeah, well, I'm not shy, so drill away.
Okay, take us back. Where are we starting from?
I think we'll start at the beginning, actually. I come from a family, I come from a very large family. Both my parents are one of 8, and it means you sort of have to fight for everything. I've lost count of how many cousins I've got, but it's about 50, I think. And so right at the beginning, my family was extremely dyslexic at a time when dyslexia wasn't really a thing. I remember one of the earliest memories I have is an educational psychologist, I think I was 7 or 8, telling me that I should take up a trade. She suggested carpentry because I wouldn't amount to anything academically, which I now think is incredibly rude to carpenters. But it sort of created this strong sense of independence. And then I went to school. I went to an all-boys Catholic boarding school when I was 13. And so my childhood we moved around a lot because my dad was a brain surgeon, my mum was an artist, and we moved between lots of different hospitals. So I would go to almost a new school every year. So developed a lot of skills of trying to fit in, basically. But as an outsider, I was quite disruptive, and because not in a sort of violent way, just academically disruptive, and because I couldn't read or write at all. I couldn't read or write. And so I was sent to a sort of very specialist school where it was me and children that had very, very extreme learning difficulties. So I was sort of bunched into that camp. It meant that I had to, really fight for everything, and everything was a challenge. This notion of challenge was very, very central to my childhood. I had a very supporting family, but it was a very, very challenging situation. And then I was sent to boarding school. And at the age of 12, I pretty much left home. So this is the sort of backdrop. And from there, I went from school to university. From university, I went and became a ski instructor. And that's what was really definitive at the time was I sort of fell in love with the barmaid, and she was in a difficult home environment, which meant it was quite difficult for her to go home. And so at the end of the ski season, we moved back to my parents' house, which, having moved out when I was 12, had that sort of sense of independence. It was quite difficult. So I found myself in a situation where I needed a job because I wanted to support us in a place separately. But I fell into the sort of graduate trap where you don't have experience if you can't get a job. Long story short, I ended up at an assessment day for graduates where the company basically was trying to convince you that you wanted to be a salesperson. And then they were under the guise of assessing you for your characteristics. And they offered me a job to work for the company. It was a company called Pareto Law. And there's a few that do this sort of thing. Long story short, they're teaching graduates who don't know what to do, that they should do selling, and then they're exploiting that to get them basically to cold call, which is a pretty traumatic thing to do, to be honest. And so I got the job on Thursday. We moved to London over the weekend, and I remember my basic salary was £15,000 per year, and my rent was £1,700 a month. And so I had to sell stuff to eat, basically. And so I ended up becoming a salesman. And that, given the fact that my childhood had been based on sort of you are in a traumatic situation, you survive, it was sort of a good environment for me, because I learned. And one of the things the company did incredibly well was, because they had this relatively fluid workforce, and it was a very traumatic thing that you were doing, like cold calling 120 people a day, trying to convince them that they should hire essentially you as a version of the system that we were promoting. And then going out to initially booking the meetings and then going out to do the meetings. I probably met, I don't know, 3,000 companies in the 5 years I was there. It was, I mean, honestly, I would do like
In 5 years, 5 years is a long time in that
it's
environment.
a long time. And I would do like 5 to 6 meetings a day. I would just drive around the M4 corridor or go around London, meeting a company, trying to get them to buy graduates, salespeople, basically. And so you get this really diverse understanding of business, because you're seeing it in real life. You get a really diverse understanding of people. And so just having exposure to lots and lots and lots of experiences as quickly as possible. It's like, I'm a big fan of experiential learning. Like, there's theory and there's application, but unless you're in a situation where you feel the emotional cascade and the trauma and all these different things, like that's when you really learn, in it. And the other thing the company did phenomenally well, the other thing the company did phenomenally well, because of this transient workforce and this traumatic situation, was they built an incredible company culture. And they were very intentional around it. And it was very, very impressive. And so the thing I learned from my experience at Pareto, beyond just exposure to loads and loads and loads of relatively tense confrontational situations, was how do you intentionally build the culture that is the backbone of the success of, in their instance, a sales operation. But I think it's universally applicable, to be honest. Like that
100%. Sounds quite informative to be a part of a culture that can sustain you for 5 years with just basic rejection as the norm.
Yeah.
That primed you really well for agency life.
Yes, it did. It's funny. I actually stopped cold calling after my first week, and I just was I basically said I didn't like cold calling. I'm just going to solve the problem in a different way. And I went around lots of different ways to try and be successful. And I wasn't the most successful, but I was by far not the least successful in that organization, was promoted through. But after a while, I remember I got slightly fixated on earning £100,000 as a goal. And because it was a sales culture, it was pretty avarice. And I realized that it was going to be almost impossible for me to earn £100,000. And I mean, bear in mind, I'd gone from 15. So it was a leap, but this was the thing. And so I left. And I went to a company that did e-learning, which was this amazing, at the time, it was an amazing thing, because you had all these organizations that had a lot of compliance risk. They wanted to mitigate their compliance risk by having an audit trail that people had gone through the learning and completed it. So I took finance and legal, and did a lot of work with some people that were quite deeply grounded in educational behavioral psychology. And so I remember it was very much an articulation of a lot of what I'd learned intrinsically. And they were able to put words around it, and they were able to codify it and put it into buckets in my own mind. And it basically, long story short, I meshed the two businesses together, and I was 20, maybe 26, 27. And one of my clients from my first job, I remember I met him for a curry, and I pitched him the idea for this new business. I asked for £250,000 worth of investment, and he said yes. And so we went in 50-50. He put up the money, I put up the idea. And I mean, I'll talk about self-learning in a second, but I remember feeling so proud that over a curry, I'd got what they were getting in The Apprentice, and they had to go through all that bullshit. That was my point of relativity, because it was the same amount of money. And so, I mean, I was a cocky shit back there. And I just thought it was...
Well, you closed a big deal. As
It
a
was a big deal.
salesperson, yeah, it's a big deal. It's that 0 to 1 step where you feel like you've triumphed, but until you actually get over the hill and look back over at the summit before you, you don't know what you've really done wrong.
And it's also that notion of not creationism, but you sort of manifested something into reality. Like like if you build something, there's enormous satisfaction from stepping back and looking at what you built. And it went from nothing to something, and you were the nexus for that change. And what the company was we would go into an organization, we would run a sort of set of diagnostics across their sales team, and we'd understand the common characteristics between the top performers and the current common characteristics of the bottom performers. And then in parallel, we would run an assessment day for new candidates coming into the market against the same criteria. And so what we ended up doing is in an organization, you would say, hey, all the top performers look like this. You're one of the top performers. Carry on. You're in a great place. All the bottom performers, you'd say, hey, you don't look anything like the top performers. You're not a top performer. But in this company over here, you look just like the top performers. And so we ended up taking the bottom performers out of one company, charging a fee to put them in the other company, and then the recruitment thing in the middle would then refill everyone else, and we charge everyone a fee on every part of the deal. And because you had this notion of expert and everyone bought into the process, you ended up in a position of quite strong, not manipulation, but control over the decision. It's much more psychologically convenient for me to put my faith in the process to make a decision for me to be successful than me make that judgment myself. But because the companies thought that people were going to be more successful, and because the people thought they were going to be more successful, ultimately they were more successful. And so the whole thing was relatively manipulative, but for the advantage of everyone involved.
So this first venture was a consultancy turn recruitment. It's one of the most powerful skills you can possibly have, which is sales and staffing sales. So at a very early stage of your career as a professional, you have the ability to drive performance in a business.
Yeah, pretty much. And that people are putting loads of other companies are putting faith in you to do that for them.
Yeah. And by practice, you're getting better through the repetitions across a variety of different companies.
Yeah, you're getting better through the repetition. And then my partner decided he wanted to move to Australia. We weren't very big. We were only about 25 people at this point. And I'm like, I don't want to move to Australia. And he's like, well, I quite like the idea and I want to take it to Australia. And so essentially he bought me out. And that was my first, it was all a pretty cozy deal.
Your first experience with a transaction, which is
exactly.
Partners wanting to separate.
And the first time I got any money, right? Beyond, it's the first time I made money outside of a salary. And I remember, bear in mind, I'm still quite young, but I remember this is so much more tax efficient. It's a much better way of doing it. But one of the terms of the deal was because essentially he was buying the concept, the idea, was that he put a no deal clause in the contract. And so I had to essentially change industry. And I was fine with that because I was kind of done with it in that the idea had turned into something real and it had been proven to be successful. And I was happy to move on. And so I took 6 months, which I hated. I liked it at the beginning, but I very quickly hated it. One of my clients, he became a friend. I used to go to his house because he used to drink very good champagne and play the drums. And he was quite cool. He was a bit older. And he was telling me about SEO, search engine optimization. And this was in 2007, 2008. And so I started reading about SEO and I liked SEO. I was like, this is good. But then I heard about PPC, pay-per-click. I was like, this is great. So I basically got a little fixated on PPC, basically cold called every PPC agency in the UK and said, can I come be a salesperson for your company? And they basically all said no because
I'm laughing also just because of the irony that so many agencies are prolific in their inability to sell. And you actually have an inbound inquiry about someone saying, I want to sell for you. And there's no lack of interest there. It's also probably the difference between the cultures, the sales culture of the US versus the UK.
It's perhaps, but it's not that they didn't want salespeople. They just didn't want they didn't want me. They wanted ex-media salespeople. And so I was like, well, if you can sell something, you can sell anything, right? So I rationalized it in my mind that it boiled down to them wanting commitment. Because if it's not skill, what they want to understand is someone's worked in media, they've sold media, therefore they can sell this. It's that they care about this, they're committed to this. It's not that they'll just sell anything. So my solution to that was I built a website that was me. It was basically my CV. It was LinkedIn before LinkedIn. And I ran a PPC campaign saying, if you're looking for someone to sell PPC, it's me. But the URL was seosales.com because I couldn't buy PPC sales. And I was like, it's pretty much the same. So the irony of me showing how committed I was also demonstrated my complete lack of understanding of what it was. And in the end, I was offered roles from two organizations. One was called Latitude and one was called Periscopics. And I took the role with Periscopics. And it was, they took a leap with me, and in many respects, I took a leap with them. And it was an amazing journey. Like, I joined as employee number 8 as their first salesperson.
I mean, at employee number 8 being the salesperson, that is a big leap.
It's a big leap.
Because you're transitioning from founder-led sales,
yes,
to being the first sales hire. You show up with a vast amount of sales experience and depth of understanding of what it takes to be a good salesperson. You are probably underqualified from an agency perspective, but overqualified from a sales competency perspective. Did they want to hire the role, or did you help them understand why they needed the role?
I think a bit of both, in that they wanted to grow, and Mark, who was running the sales, it was the two founders were Mark and Simon. Mark was sort of running the sales. I think he really wanted to be running the finance, and Simon didn't want anything to do with it. And so they've been going for sort of 3. It's a bit sketchy when they started because it was in a bedroom, and like at some point it went from being not real to real. But they've been going for somewhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on who you ask. I think they had tried, they'd interviewed some salespeople before, so I think they were in the mindset, but they had to click. And I think we clicked. I mean, I was just weird enough not to come across like a salesperson, in that, like, most salespeople they're all about the agenda. They're all about their agenda.
They wear completely different clothes than the rest of the agency team.
They do.
Yes.
And it's about trying to empathize with everyone. And I think lots of sales experience for me, it boils down to 2 things, which is see everyone's perspective. Like, genuinely understand their perspective and how they look at this thing, and then enthusiasm. And basically, enthusiasm is a panacea for everything. If you can fake enthusiasm, you can achieve pretty much anything. But you can't smell like you're faking enthusiasm. It has to be genuinely faked. Faked genuinely, if that makes sense. And so the success of selling in agencies is about expectation management. Like, if you can win a deal where the customer or client has the lowest possible expectation of you, you're setting up your team for the greater success, and therefore your agency. I'll steal a line from Rob Pierre, which is happiness is expectation minus reality. And so it's keeping that expectation down. So don't oversell, and then start to build from individual enthusiasm, charisma, trustability, whatever you want to call it. How do you build that into a system? And between 2009 and 2014, we grew Periscopics 60% a year, very consistently, and started to become more of a dominant position in the market, but with a very strong sense of humility.
How did you evolve during that time? Because you went from being a owner of your own first business to a team member in someone else's business, driving growth, and then achieving that growth. Like, did you stay in the same role? Was it a little bit undefined? What part of that journey expanded you professionally?
So, I'll do the personal first, in that in my role at Alchemy Consulting, which was the first one, I developed a pretty healthy Messiah complex because I had designed the business proposition, and I had hired a team where the concept was very squarely architected in my brain. And so and I was the one that I was the closer, convincer. Essentially, at a company of 20, I think it was 26, including me, the whole organization was basically a pyramid where I was the tip of the spear. And it made me a pretty awful person, actually. And I think you have to have a Messiah complex to understand the dangers of one. And so if it comes on slowly, and it's like boiling the frog. You don't know it's happening. That is super dangerous. And I'll get to it when I talk about my Merkle experience, but when I meet founders, ultimately it's the experience of being a founder, which is both the blessing and the curse, in that it makes the lens through which the world is viewed can become quite dangerous. So my experience of having a Messiah complex was very formative to me as a person. And really, I mean, I think in that time, you would say that the line between arrogance and confidence, pretty wavy. But now I would think that I'm not low ego. I have a big ego, but I'm very, 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 very in check.
Most founders who fit that definition have some difficulties after they exit the first organization, because your Messiah complex is wrapped into that experience. And then overnight you find yourself without the people, without the priority.
I actually found that more with this when we exited. So we exited Periscopics to Merkle, and I'll come back to tell the story there. But because I'd been at Periscopics and then Merkle into Dentsu, because that journey had been so long, I found not the Messiah complex, but the conflation of my identity to be so synonymous with that, the feeling of being needed. It was different to a Messiah complex. It was more that the flow and the rate at which you make decisions, and it's the power, really. It's the fact that you're needed all the time, and you're important. Based on it becomes slightly addictive, and you do miss it, and you start to challenge your own self-esteem and your own self-worth. I experienced that after I came out of Merkle way more than I did when I came out of Alchemy.
Okay, well, let's not hand wave over how you got into Merkle. Then the story you're setting up is a small 7-person agency was starting to grow up. They brought on their first salesperson. You grew 60% a year during your time with the company. And then the founders got the opportunity to be a part of something bigger. Give that context.
We'd ridden the digital wave, right? So it was a bit like salmon fishing, and they're running. You just have to put the rod in, you pull them out. And we were winning lots and lots of small accounts. And as we moved up the value chain, we got to a point where we started to have more control over our own destiny. And we did a strategy session to sort of say, which directions, how are we going to grow? We'd gone from PPC, built out analytics, which was a pretty standard path for a lot of these performance agencies to drive a train up the market. And we basically said, the conversation broadly centered on, do we want to move up into traditional media and branding, or do we want to move down into CRM? And we decided we wanted to move down. So we were then, okay, if we move down, here are the options that we have. We looked at a few CRM agencies that we could buy. So do we become the platform? And then there was a series of other options, right? So geographical expansion was also on the cards, but did anyone want to go to America at the time? And we looked at Merkle because they had just acquired a company called RKG, Ritten Kaufman Group, which was an agency we really admired. We're like, they're the us of America. And so because they acquired them, Simon, one of the founders, emailed David Williams and said, hey, we're like RKG. If you've got any interest in being in Europe, let us know. And he was actually in London at the time and emailed back looking at another company they went on to buy. And we have what I can only describe as a full-blown love affair, which continues for me today. And we sold to Merkle in about 3 months. Because
in setting that as kind of a situational dynamic, which was you became an inbound lead after seeing a transaction of a similar type of company in a different market.
Yes.
You are the best sellers.
I'm not sure I can take much credit for that. It was very much a sort of specky thing from Simon.
This wasn't the first time you've engaged prospective buyers. You had made progress. People were proactive at reaching out before you just reached out to Merkle. They knew what they were looking for.
Yes. And people had contacted us, but we didn't really have any interest at that point. Very much, I was the sales guy. And the deal I'd negotiated was the more we grow the company, the more my option pool grows. And to be honest, in hindsight, I completely lowballed my suggestion, but I ultimately ended up having 10% of the company. And so it was a material deal for me.
An entry-level negotiation? So that's when you joined? Is it
no,
number
it wasn't
8
when I
you
joined.
had that? Okay.
It
matured as you were proven and had a greater expectation. They wanted you to stay. Yeah.
well, I set the expectation on the way in with the understanding that I had to prove myself. And so then we said, well, this is an agreed deal that we can work on. And then it was very successful. And I also started, because we'd been in the salmon fishing stage, I started to build a sales team that was a sales team in an agency, which again is an uncharacteristic thing to do. And so we had,
especially in the UK.
Especially in the UK. And in the end, I had a sales team with a salesperson that specialized in every single one of the functions we did. So we would go into a pitch, and you are meeting the experts in every area. Every single one of them was a salesperson, because they were subject matter experts that were equivalent to anyone in the agency. But their job was to convince people that we were the right partner. And so we had this super efficient sales model where, I mean, we were just writing the presentation in the reception when we were going to go into the room. And we know, and also the entire business knew the story we were going to tell. So the handover was done. And so you ended up with this very, very, very slick system, which was anchored in very high trust. And one of the enduring characteristics of Periscopics is, even if I meet any of them today, we have a very deep bond because of the journey we went on together and the trust that we put into each other, where we all had our lanes. And there was absolute trust that everyone would hold up their end of the bargain.
It's a ball club. You were winning games together, being successful, getting rejected together. That trials and turbulations bonds people, and then you win at the highest level. So just to give a bow on this, you come in as employee number 8. You help grow the organization with a sales-driven mindset. You matured to the point to where you have an expanded sales team. What did Periscopic look like before selling to Merkle? What was the size of the team and relative sales team?
We were about 120 people, and the sales team was 5.
And how long was that journey for you?
We sold to Merkle in 15, so 6 years.
Yeah, that's fantastic growth. That's not only were you being productive, being a part of an organization at that size really gives you opportunities to accelerate your capability as a professional. That was
nothing.
Again,
extremely. After we sold, we grew between 2015 and 2019, we got to 450 people. And
did that make the deal with Merkle more straightforward? The fact that you were so confident in your ability to hit earnouts in sales?
Yes, in hindsight, you don't know, but in the early days, we were growing fast enough that they were like, okay, we'll just leave those guys alone. Like, growth is a panacea. And so if you're the problem child, you get micromanaged. If you're not, you're not the problem, that someone else is the problem child, right? You don't have to be best, you just have to be better. And so there's 2 aspects to it. One, that is also the character of the leadership team at Merkle, in that they had the same mentality that we had at Periscopics, which is why we were such a natural fit. Super high trust, super high capability, hire good people, leave them alone. And the curveball was that Merkle sold to Dentsu in 16, and actually that galvanized everything. So we had this overlapping earnout, in that the Periscopics earnout was 3 years, and 2 years, and we smashed it out of the park, like completely nailed it. It's funny, I had dinner last night with Ben Wood, who was running iProspect at the time, and he was talking about how irritating it was that they just bought Periscopics, and it was like, and so we pivoted from just pitching for to pitching for and pitching in, and so we started to compete for briefs that were coming in and for accounts, and so that accelerated our growth because we went from being capable to being capable and relevant for the biggest possible accounts. And so we started winning accounts like Tesco, like Sky. I mean, these are some of the biggest accounts that you can get in the UK. And we started diversifying our capability, built out, and we'd never done SEO. I was very resistant to doing SEO because of the lack of measurability. And it moves you from this very demonstrable performance ecosystem where you don't have to defend a decision, the data does it for you. And that's a different skill set that you need in the team. You can have highly analytical people where their trust is anchored in security associated with viable data sets to people that work in the world of perception. And that is a more complicated, much more high intensity management environment. And so the sales team worked in the world of perception quite tight, and the rest of the business was insulated from that. And so then as we diversified our capability, we had a bigger support infrastructure, we had more financial security, and then going to Dentsu, you don't have to invest, you just have to do better. And so it's just, that was again a positive step.
So you had about 10% of the business, you transact. How much insights did you have to the transaction? Because it happened so quickly. And obviously they wanted your buy-in. They don't want you going anywhere in order for them to perform. Was that like your true exposure to the next level of transactions?
Yeah. I was not central, but I was pretty close. I think the first meeting the Merkle people had with me, they hated me. So I nearly disrupted the deal because they wanted to understand the sort of pricing methodology. And I was honest. I was like basically we make it up in that we've got a real sense of what each deal should be and where the price should be, but there's no real methodology that in there. We just sort of make it up, which was true, but also deeply disconcerting. And so there was naivety in how do you frame stuff to give confidence in structure and security through a deal process. But there was also sort of charming honesty.
Yeah, but from their perspective, it's risk, right? So if so much of the knowledge based on how to close these deals is at the conceptual discretion of the salespeople and value-based selling, it's hard for them to replicate if you all leave. So I could see how that would be not as appetizing for them. So you met with them, the deal gets done rather quickly. You get put into Merkle. Merkle has more resources. You can grow. You smash the earnout. What did that look like? How big were you when Dentsu happened?
I think we were about 400 people. It was really, really rapid. Like the rate, at one point, the thing that was limiting our growth was literally desks. And I can't get more people in the building. So I took out 9 meeting rooms and added an extra 80 desks. And over the weekend, I didn't tell anyone, but we had 120 wide desks, and we knocked them down. We took all the desks out and replaced them with 1 meter wide desks, and then put everyone back in the same place to see if they would notice. But we ended up adding all these extra desks because that was the rate limiting factor. It was like, because we only grew by academies. We didn't really hire much people from the industry. So it was just more geeks, more clients, more geeks, more clients, more geeks, more clients. And it was pretty linear. And that was the way that we operated. And Mark, who was one of the founders, he ran the finance org, and we were hand in glove. We worked very closely together. We looked at it through the lens of the pyramid that for every big client, which was more margin dilutive, counterintuitively, for us, it was more margin dilutive. We had to win 2 of these, 4 of these, and 8 of these. And so like our win was described that way. And then the other big change was I completely changed the way that Merkle priced. And so we pivoted the whole business operation to this model where I made up this thing called a DTU, which was basically an artificial currency. And that was 0.2 of an FTE. And so based on your level of seniority, you'd pay 3, 5, 7, or 9,000 pounds per month per DTU. And you can add, remove, or exchange a DTU with 30 days notice. And so when I went into a customer, I'd say, okay, here is your plan of your team. And this is how it flexes seasonality, and you can adjust and tweak it in real time. It comes out to this many DTUs per year. So it was sort of FTE. They were sort of comfortable with it, but it allowed us to move it from people to function.
Yeah. This sounds very akin to Scrum and story point attributions, where you're trying to give some credibility to the amount of experience being applied to an efficient task. And so that's very effective pricing, transformative for a company of their size. Did you grow the sales team with that growth as well?
Yeah. And the sales team got up to about 9 at its zenith. And those 9 people are still very tight. Like, we still go out for dinner together. Like, I promoted someone to run the team. I ended up running the agency. And so it was, the way that Merkle was structured is we had marketing solutions, which was basically the data and decisioning business. And then agency services, which is basically the agency activation business and analytics. And so we divided in these two things. I ran this bit, Sam Danford ran this bit. And that's how we grew organically. And during the Merkle period, we became very acquisitive because once we'd been bought by Dentsu, they gave us access to quite large corp dev capability and access to capital. And as their strategy was acquisitive and our growth was, we were trying to be 50-50, 50% organic and 50% acquisition. And through that journey, basically I spent a lot of time meeting other agencies to see whether they would be a suitable partner for us. And so again, a bit like the early days where you go out and see lots and lots of different companies, you go out and see lots and lots of different agencies, and very quickly you're going to start seeing this agency is small, and what are their priorities? What's their leadership ecosystem? What's their business processes? How do they run their management infrastructure? Like you start to, it takes all these things and you get lots of different perspective. You get to see them all. And we bought 7 companies, I think, during the Merkle earnout, and grew Merkle in Europe to about 3,500 people and broadened beyond just the UK with acquisitions in the Netherlands, Spain, and Germany were the main ones. Germany and Switzerland.
You had a front row seat to that activity. And as you so accurately describe, seeing under the hood of that many businesses gives you a lot of acceleration learning. Like you're compressing time considerably versus the years in a single venture that you had been exposed to.
Yeah.
What did you learn? What were some of the insights from seeing under the hood of these companies, ultimately closing on 7 of them?
Clean accounts are really important. Like the businesses that had really messy, slightly dodgy accounting practices normally were indicative of something else. And then the founders have a really outsized role and what their succession plan is. So if I were to simplify that to 2 things, really it boils down to that. Like there are some obvious red flags like the consolidation of their revenue and, how their business, the actual shape of their business. But when you get past the sort of core hygiene factors, what the founders are like and do you trust them? And how much of the behavioral issues do they have around just their own sense of self-importance, their own sort of how much of their ego is conflated into the business in a constructive way or a destructive way.
Back to your Messiah complex.
It's that, but it can be a load of other things because there's sort of 4 stages that companies go through where the first stage is just the will of the founder forces it into reality. The second stage, the founder is then directing a leadership team to make decisions. The third stage is the leadership team are making decisions independently, autonomously, and you build distributed accountability and a governance framework and all that sort of stuff. And then the fourth is you move to a matrix, right? So at the different stage, the level and responsibility of their founder is different. And the other thing is there was strangely little correlation between the size of the company and the stage they've moved to. And so, yes, you could bracket it. Like this is often sort of 0 to 50 and 50 to 200, 200 to 500 or 200 to 500,000, 1,000 plus. But there were loads of organizations that we met. There were 1,000 people that were still here. And so like how much structure, like if in the UK, a company is often called an organization. Like how much actual organization is there in this entity? And so how much, what's the mythology? What is the culture is such a central thing. Like for me, an agency is 2 things. It's culture and momentum. Like how does the culture show up in behaviors? How universal are those behaviors? How much of the motivation is intrinsic versus extrinsic? Like how kind are people to each other? What behaviors are tolerated and what behaviors aren't tolerated? Like you sort of get that with interviewing the team, but then it's not interviewing the team where you go in and interview the team. It's actually going out for lunch or going out for drinks or dinner with the team in a way that isn't curated.
Yeah. Isn't scripted or choreographed.
Exactly.
Well, most folks who are inexperienced with M&A or early in their M&A do 90% due diligence on the business, 10% on the founder and culture. And it sounds like you learned and as well inherently believed that it's 60-40. It's 60% the team, the culture that drives the operational and organizational value, and 40% the rigor, the cleanliness, the preparation, the hygiene of the company?
I would even go as close to 50-50. In that, like, is this team, if you lose your top 3 clients tomorrow through no fault of your own, are they going to be able to react in a way that's constructive? They're going to be able to rebuild it. Like, what behaviors took them from where they were to where they are today? Because they're the behaviors I expect to take from where they are today to where we expect them to be tomorrow. It's do these people make the right decision specifically under pressure?
Wonderful. So we had unpacked a little bit how Merkle saw the business differently than Dentsu.
Yeah.
Merkle being team oriented, Dentsu being client. Maybe unpack that a bit.
Well, when I did my exit interview, the way I articulated it, but this is my articulation, it's very personal, right? But the way I saw the priorities, and I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but I am saying they're different. In that, because Merkle came from absolutes, they were a data company really focused on the solution, and because Dentsu had come from a sort of more creative and brand-driven company, they much more focused on the story. And so you've got two people coming into a situation that are coming from completely different perspectives. And storytelling and solutioning, like, this is anchored absolutely. If you can't do it, don't do it. Do it and believe that we'll be able to get there, right? They're just very, very different places. And the other is, like, I think this, I'm talking on behalf of an industry now, but certainly my perception is that the performance industry saw the team as the asset and the client as the commodity. Because the quality of your people, because the industry was growing so fast, clients come and go. Like, you can get clients, you can lose clients, but people and that bond and that connection that we had at Periscopics and then we had at Merkle, that is gold. And so, but Dentsu very much saw the client as the asset. And so if we go back to your DD example, like, I'm 50-50 and some companies are 90-10. Like, if you see the clients as the asset, you want to spend all your time over here. And if you see the team as the asset, you're going to spend all your time over here. And so, like, that meant that the decisions, the priorities, one, they saw people as more transactional. If you will make teams redundant. We would invest far more in training and development, far more in experiential learning and tolerating the risk of failure and celebrating it as a process of innovation. Whereas in this ecosystem, it's just harder to do that because you're focused on the client. You wrap your business about the client. We used to wrap the client around our business. And so you end up with these very, very different approaches that really come from different ends of the marketing spectrum. And it is a sort of microcosm of the sort of brand performance oil water issue, which is to emulsify it, you require just really high degrees of empathy and a deep understanding of the focus, the priority, and most importantly, the reasons behind that underpin the culture of this organization. And, like, my perception, which is limited to my worldview, was that, the recipe, the ingredients were great, but the recipe was wrong because you've got oil and water. And so, leadership is the mustard that should bring those two things together. But if the leadership only looked at it from an oil perspective, they look at water as something to repel.
Yeah, it's a wonderful example of you can expand and diversify the risk profile of your business by having different types of businesses within it. Where things go wrong is when you try to merge those businesses together in leadership and ideology. Because from a diversification perspective, it's great to have both.
Yeah, I agree.
When you try to create efficiencies through the administration of that organization, well, that becomes hairy. And it's just, I think every organization, every company services the market according to its core values and culture and its talent. And so there's some people who align better with the performance environment and others who are going to align better with the story, brand environment. And similar to you, no judgment on either path. It's just when you have the expectations that those two can operate within the same universe, does it become rather challenging to create value. So, but we're not done. Dentsu, as you described it, had a philosophy of client. Merkle had a philosophy of team. You have this compounding reinforcement that the team and the talent and culture drive value. And then you find yourself leaving Dentsu, Merkle.
Yeah. So left Merkle because I didn't feel like Dentsu was the environment for me, basically. And so I left and I joined Jellyfish, and I was there for a pretty short time, to be honest. I was there for a couple of reasons. One, Rob, I'd always really admired Rob. Like, Google had done a great job of curating a pretty tight community between the indie leaders. And Rob and I were pretty healthy frenemies, is probably the easiest way to describe it, in that we were adversaries in pitches, but we celebrated each other's success. And I called him up and said, look, I'm coming out. Do you want to work together? And he said, yes. And I came in, and we worked together for about 6 months, and it was incredibly informative. But I called him up and I was like, I feel like a backseat driver. And like you can't have two people trying to drive an agenda. And I was always second fiddle, like, quite rightly. And so I left. But before I joined Jellyfish, I was offered a role at RocketMill. And actually, when I was at Merkle, I tried to buy RocketMill. And RocketMill, of all the companies I went to see, was the one I wanted to buy most. Is the one where what I saw were the critical ingredients to make a delicious meal had come together most effectively with a really strong leadership recipe. And so the business was different in that it was more centered around performance, but where me and most of my peers had really centered around paid search and analytics and just sort of gone quite vertical and had these other things that we broadened out later. And they had created a fully integrated horizontal business from creative ideation and production through media distribution into experience and analytics. And it was compact, but very, very culturally dense, very strong, very impressive, built on the right principles, had this lovely sort of cultural charisma and a really, I don't know, fuck you mentality. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I would guess so if they weren't persuaded to join you.
Yeah, very much. They were like, no, we don't want to build a Dentsu. I was trying to convince them. I was like, no, you're part of Merkle. And they were like, Ugh. And Sam, there were two brothers that were Ben founded it, Sam ran it in the inception bit, but they ran it. They were the two people. Basically, like, Sam and I had known each other for a long time in the sort of Google ecosystem. I very much remember meeting him. I just sort of loomed up to a bar at a YouTube event and just got chatting to him. We sort of made friends, and that's how it sort of worked. And then we stayed in touch, and so he asked me to join in a sort of nondescript role. He was like, come and join, and then we'll make you CEO later. And I was like, no, either give me the job or don't give me the job, but you decide. And about 6 months into my time at Jellyfish, he phoned me up and said, I'll give you the job. And so I joined, and in that time we'd stayed in touch, and they had sold into an employee-owned trust, which was a mechanism. It's a bit like an ESOP in America. We're going through COVID, and COVID had changed the sort of employee paradigm where the power dynamic had shifted to the employee. Yeah. There was hyper salary inflation in certainly in the UK, I think everywhere.
We call it the Great Resignation in 21.
The Great Resignation, exactly. And so you had this situation where you had this incredibly strong cultural business that had validated its cultural credentials with the decision the founders had made, which were in many respects selfless, because we tried to buy them. They could have got more money than the choice they made. And I went in and led this employee-owned trust. And so there was a trust board that sat above. And so you had a really robust governance framework and a really strong team. And I was based in London, they were based in Brighton. And so we started to grow the business, building out different capability sets. We started to build a core technology called Octane that started to drive more of our business operations, and then built an office in London and grew that business again pretty rapidly. I joined in Easter 21, and in the end we sold to PMG in December 23.
Yeah, so, and when you told me that timeline, it smelled of premeditated.
Honestly, and it sounds like it really wasn't. Like I went in and I was really excited to run an AOT because my core belief was that people are everything. Like, people are amazing. You give them more responsibility, give them more opportunity, and more often than not, they will rise to the challenge. And my childhood had meant that that's what you had to do. Like, it's just like you had to grow. and to fill the void that you were put in. And the notion of not doing that, it's just not, it's not part of my worldview.
Yeah, you can't compute.
Yeah, it's like, why wouldn't you do that?
You step into an environment where the business's governance and structure reflects your ideologies and belief and values for people.
Yes.
With that, it's like the perfect storm or Goldilocks period where the company is going to grow based upon the decisions of bringing in someone of your caliber to help shepherd it and mentor it, given to where you come from. And then, although not intended, PMG knocks on your door. Explain for those, this is a very important distinction. You have founders who sold into their employees, and then the opportunity to transact knocks on the door.
There is a stage in between.
Lot. Okay.
Yeah, there's a critical stage in between. In that the growth vehicle in my mind we could do was convince other founders to sell into an EOT and then merge the EOTs together. So you had a core motivation fabric that was aligned by design. KPMG politely informed me that was not a viable option for a whole load of tax reasons. And then you end up in a situation where this is just an EOT mechanism. This is not a RocketMill mechanism. But when the founders sell into the EOT, one of the benefits of doing that is that they move their personal tax liability onto the company. And so the company has a deferred tax liability on exit. So you end up in a situation that you have quite a lot of intrinsic cost in that. So you have to grow the pie big enough for it to be financially meaningful for the people in the business, because they are the beneficiaries of any exit. But if you grow it too much, you essentially put off any potential acquirer, because if the through flow of cash to the team is so high, you're creating fuck you money, and then everyone's going to leave.
And they leave.
Right?
Yep.
So you have this Goldilocks zone within which is a sort of area where you can transact. And if you go through it, you're in a pickle, right? So because during that period, we grew from about 70 people to about 200 in that 18 months. So we're on track to like blast through this thing really fast. And so we weren't just talking to PM. I remember I did an offsite with our leadership team, our management team. And at the end of the offsite, we collectively came to the conclusion that we needed to exit for the reasons I've just described. I may have come to that conclusion a little bit before the offsite, but we collectively came to it on the offsite. And after that, then it was a case of saying, okay, well, what are the things that are critically important to us? What, if we have to exit, what are the circumstances? And also what, as part of the EOT mandate, which is this business is run for the benefit of the team, delivers, how do we deliver for them? Well, there's a couple of things. One is AI is going to transform our industry. How do we place people in an environment where they're going to flourish in an AI first world? How do I make sure that there is really limitless career headroom for the team? Which meant either going into a much, much larger organization that had access to a different nature of client, or a global business, or a business that was growing globally. And then the third was like, we were going to a bit of a financial downturn. How do I insulate them from the risk in the market if there's a market contraction? And so these things together, for me, I personally wanted to sell to an American company that emulated a lot of the characteristics of Merkle. In that, not Merkle as a business, but Merkle bought Periscopics, and it was the first acquisition it had done outside the US. And I remember we were in a pub after meeting the Merkle leadership team, David, Tim, and Craig Dempster. And we were sitting down and we were having a conversation, and there were three things that we really liked. One was they're 3,000 miles away. One that was that we were the first acquisition outside of the US, so we had a degree of sort of agency over European knowledge. And I think Ben, our head of analytics, who was part of the tight team that were making the decision, had read an article that Americans over-index the IQ of Brits by 15 points because of our accent. And we thought this is a winning trifecta. And so looking to emulate that meant that trying to sell to one of the expanding indies was a really sensible choice.
Yeah, which really narrows the buyer pool.
It does, but there's still quite a lot. There was Tenuity and WPMH and Aveda, and there was still a group that we could have sold to. And PMG was just so far and ahead of everyone else in terms of business operations, ambition, technology, which was such a central decision. I mean, I spent basically 18 months talking to George every day, or it felt like that anyway. It just felt like the fit was there. And that strategic rationale, like the hurdles that we used to communicate to the team was, is there a strategic rationale? Is there a cultural rationale? Is there a financial rationale? And this was very much third. And the strategy was very clearly there. Huge operation in the US, need a very, very small operation in Europe. We had very naturally complementary skills, a very naturally complementary culture, and we managed to make the numbers work. So it was, it was.
You have the fortunate but also skilled opportunity to get pieces of businesses here, Tom, that you helped grow. So by the time you transacted with PMG, what did your incentive look like along with the rest of the trust?
Well, there was an EMI that sat over the OT, and okay. I benefited through that.
You've been a salesperson by your ability to create accelerations of your own personal earnings time and time again. And what I love about it is like in sales, you can sell other people's products and profit off of it. You've essentially stepped in and kind of like the Midas touch, companies more valuable, and then got your participation in that value creation.
It's like a commission structure.
It's aligning incentives.
It's aligning incentive. Well, you get the behaviors you incentivize. I mean, that's one of the. It's funny. I was talking to one of the sales guys who's now a Jellyfish. Actually, I moved some of the sales team over to Jellyfish, and he was like, he was talking to me about how some frustration because I have a sort of loose mentoring relationship with him, and he was like, "You're right. You get the behaviors you incentivize. Okay, just align them together."
For someone who's kind of a founder, the kinds that you've stepped in and helped and mentored and worked for over the year, who's yet to acquire a company, but knows that inorganic needs to be a material opportunity both on the buy side and eventually the sell side. What's your advice for them around doing M&A?
I would look at it like an interview, primarily, right? In an interview, you want to know that people have the core skills. You have to assess whether they actually have the skills that you need. But the more they need to change to be naturally aligned with you, like their position in repose, it's a bit like a marriage, actually. Like the more my wife has to change, the less successful our marriage is going to be. She's tried, but she's not going to change me, right? So it's either we choose to compromise and the buyer, which often feels like the prime or the position of ascendancy, can't be unwilling to change. The example I use is, like, I can use this because I'm British, right? That if you look at the conquering nations through history, some try to impose their culture onto the country they conquered. None tried to take the culture of the country they conquered, but many tried to fuse them and build a new culture. But the culture of Britain is so deeply reflective of our colonial heritage. Like our favorite food is chicken tikka masala. That is the most popular food in the UK, which is some horrible bastardized version of chicken tikka and tomato sauce. But it's don't try and impose, take the best of both and intentionally build something new. And so if that's what you're going to end up doing culturally and emotionally and with the people and what they feel, make sure that the company you buy has a personality in a cultural personality being a company personality being its culture that is naturally aligned to your values and principles. And I remember early in my career, I thought values and principles were just such bullshit. Why are these leaders going on about values and principles? It's just like this thing that is on a screensaver that bubbles around on the screen, right? But actually, when you really drive it down, it's the core of motivation, and it's what people feel on a Sunday night, and it's what behaviors they're willing to do and how they want to show up. And so how do you make people, you can't make people want to do what you want them to do. So find the people that care about the same shit you care about, and then motivate them in the direction that is in your shared self-interest.
If you were building an agency today with where we see AI going, this market,
yeah,
what are you focusing on?
I organized a sort of dining club of industry leaders, and it's very, very intentionally open. And I mean, it's like it's in the basement of Chatham House type thing. And we had this conversation last night. It's intentionally small. It's only 8 people, but it circulates around a community of about 45. And essentially the conclusion we came to is that the role of an agency, you're always going to find it in the messiest space in the market. Because the role of an agency ultimately is to give trust to another person to be brave. Yes, there's organization, but agencies mushroomed in media when media started to get complicated. Then they mushroomed in digital when digital started to become complicated. Then mobile, then like all these different things. At the moment, the messiest bit is social, creative, and influencer, right? In that it's hyper dynamic. There's like you can use AI as an agent to simplify, particularly anything at this end. You can use AI to simplify because it's not messy anymore. Through time, we've applied order, partly psychologically, partly linguistically, partly through process. Like this has been ordered broadly, right? And if it's been ordered, it's now commoditized. Go to the messy end. Whatever the messy thing is, where people are scared, intimidated, don't understand, go there and then use AI to do all of that.
Yeah. And when it comes to the talent and people that you're referring to, especially the younger folks who are just getting started, what's your advice for them?
I actually want to broaden your question because one of the things that there are so many older people out of work that can't get into work. There are.
Well, it's both directions. Yeah.
It goes in both directions, right? So half of people above 50 in the UK are self-employed. There's a reason for that.
It's the Atkins diet on the hamburger. It's the bun has been removed and it's just the meat.
Exactly. So if it were me, I would hire both ends of the spectrum and put them together. So I would hire one of the least employed group that is incredibly experienced and capable, but has needs the organizational bridge to get into the workforce. There are a lot of really amazing women above 50 that are finding it very, very hard to get into the workforce. I would hire them and take a load of these super bright AI native younglings and bring them together where they're the bridge, they're the wisdom. And
a sort of reverse apprentice.
Yes, exactly. And then just pair them off. And you can say, this is your forward deployed engineer and this is your strategist. You can wrap the language around it as much as you like. But the reality is that if you look at where the capability is, the momentum is over here and the good decision making is over here. And the expense is in here.
I want to close with this last thought for yourself. So given what you've gone through, sales, challenge, hurdles along the way, proving and creating value over time, what type of advice would you give your younger self? Because Tom, you can't go back in time and tell yourself that it's going to be okay, keep pushing. You did that. So what does that look like?
I would probably go back to myself and give myself advice around stress management, because one of the interview questions I ask is, what is a big number? And I'm using it as a gauge to try and understand relative perspective. Because when I was at Periscopics, a big number was like, I remember I did a deal with Dandy's Topsoil, and literally this company just sold soil, and they paid us £1,000 a month, and that was the biggest deal I'd ever done. It was enormous. It was like, whoa, this is amazing. And then as you gain experience, you gain perspective, and as you gain perspective, you rationalize importance. And the difference between this and this is generally lots of stress. And so the more certainly as I've got older, I've got calmer. And there's been a lot of damage done to me and to people around me in the stress between this place and this place. So I would go back to myself and say, you're not saving lives. You're just selling ads, right? So just chill the fuck out, because it's not that important. It's not that important. And there's a tension there, because you do want people to want to push, to want to care, right? But you don't want them to care so much that they eat themselves alive. And it's a fine line, and learn to govern that line, and psychological structures that allow you to understand when you just stop. Because the ability to say no is so, so important. And actually, that's the other big lesson I'd say, is you build culture when you say no, not when you say yes. You build trust when you say no, not when you say yes. You build confidence when you say no, not when you say yes. Like, say no more to people and say yes more to experiences.
Wonderful. If someone's listening to this and says, wow, Tom, you've now become my unofficial mentor, how can I thank you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
You can thank me by not asking me to become your official mentor. I don't know, just hook me up on LinkedIn. And I mean, my view is I'm a heavy believer in the law of reciprocal altruism, otherwise known as karma. So just be nice to everyone and good shit comes around. So yeah, just get in touch on LinkedIn.
Perfect, Tom. Thank you.
Cheers.